Thanks for the intro, Andrew. Yeah, our conversation, this was last month, was great. I feel like we came up with probably topics for an entire year worth of talks. Uh, but yeah, to shrink this down into an hour long or hour, whatever long this takes, kind of presentation, we needed to shrink it down. And luckily, we were working on some interesting stuff, and we're able to tie it together into a story. And I was able to stay focused enough to not just rewrite this entire presentation today about Devin, which I don't know if anybody else saw the announcement yesterday. It's like pretty wild. Um, but I didn't, and so we're going to stay on topic. And let's see here. Let's bring up a little bit of a size here. We see the slides. Okay. Just rearranging my windows for this. Um, yeah, so yeah, I'm Scott Werner, CEO and co-founder of Sublayer, where we're building tools to get AI to write code for us. Not in the same way that Devin does. We think that it's much more of an augmented kind of partnership with AI rather than a hey AI go do this. And so for my talk today, called Going Postel, I'm going to talk about embracing Ruby's flexibility with LLM generated code. And the chat here. Forget that window. Did not coordinate this event. Yeah, and so how we can use Postel's law to take LLM generated code further. And a talk about, so Postel's law says that you should be liberal in what you accept and conservative in what you send, and that enables a lot more interoperability, robustness. It kind of was an original principle around networking, but I think it also applies here when you never know what you're going to get from generative AI. And on that note, I had a fun idea. Don't know how it's going to go, but I'm going to try to live generate the slides with PowerPoint Copilot for the first half of this. And we'll see how it goes. I have a backup presentation. Unmute and start booing if it becomes really distracting. So let's get started. So to start off, when I talk about LLM generated code, I'm sure a lot of you have tried out GitHub Copilot, maybe creating, we talked a little bit around, using ChatGPT and using kind of the chat interfaces. I'm sure you've run into a lot of errors when you're doing it, code quality, some of the other kind of errors are, you maybe didn't give it enough context and it calls methods that don't exist. It tries to call methods with camel case rather than snake case or something. Maybe your team has specific language around particular things that it doesn't know, and you can't just like copy and paste the code and use it directly. You have to kind of do things with it a lot of the time. But there's another way to kind of handle it is if you kind of take Postel's law into account and be liberal in what you accept from it and build your applications in a way that that whatever code you get back from the LLM is working code, which is kind of flipping a lot of the approaches that we see out there on its head, where a lot of work is spent trying to get the LLM to give you exactly what you want, uh, inverting that, making it so that whatever the LLM gives you is what you want. And that's a much easier thing to do because these things will never be 100%. You always have to take into account that an error or hallucination is going to happen. But what you have full control over is your code base. And so you can design your code base in a way that it will just work. And Ruby is the perfect language for something like that. We've already kind of internalized a lot of the principles and the spirit of Postel's law in the code that we work with. I know when I first started programming Ruby, one of the suggestions that you would get was don't even look at the API docs, just try to call a method, and a lot of the time that method will already exist. That method will already be there. The principle of least astonishment. We're used to a lot of different aliases for methods, a lot of different ways of doing things. And that's a little bit, in the spirit of Postel's law, that Ruby is very liberal in what it accepts from us and is very conservative in what it sends. And let's see what else does it say about this. Compatibility and ease of use. Easy to parse and interpret, sure. And I think with LLMs, as we start to have more and more, we have to be more and more liberal in what we accept. Ruby has a lot of built-in functionality that enables us to take it further. And just to list a few, dynamically typed, dynamic dispatch, the runtime is it's modifiable at runtime. You can reopen classes, all the meta programming. All of that is kind of like a first-class citizen in the language to enable more and more flexibility in the applications you build, because the code could be coming from somewhere else now. And so that's where the header for this talk kind of came from. We can make it we can make it so that the code will run. And so I'm going to share some code demos now where we kind of take that step by step further and further, showcasing some of Ruby's pretty unique capabilities. And let's switch the screen here. Okay, and how is the code? Bigger, smaller? Go a couple steps bigger.
Looks good on my screen.
Looks good? Okay, cool. So to start out, I'm going to start with this application, this project we just released. It's an open source server called Blueprints that allows you to capture patterns in your code and use those as a basis for generation. So one of the ways that you can rely on the code coming back from the LLM being code that you can use is to just tell it what code you're already using. And so here's an example. We've got the Blueprint server and editor plugins for Vim, VS Code, IntelliJ IDEA, and now Sublime. And so what you can do is, once you have a pattern that you'd like to capture, like an index page, we're probably going to be doing that pretty frequently. You can capture that. It gets sent to your locally running Blueprint server. A description is generated, vector embeddings are generated. And what that enables us to do is that when you say you have a, the next feature you work on is the customer index view, all you need to do is put a description of what you're trying to do, a flex index view for our customer's resource. And that is used to search your local vector database, find the closest match for code that you've stored, and then use that as a basis to generate the new code. So you can see here, our index page has a section with a view for a particular thing and an aside with the list. And that's the structure we're using. Here, it assumed that we were going to have a customer view and a customer list component, which is a good guess because on our Blueprints index view, we had a blueprint view and a blueprint list. And you can see it kind of used the same Tailwind classes and everything. And yeah, the next step would be, go ahead and implement those customer view. But, for whatever reason, sometimes your team might not have, consistent patterns across all of the code that you generate. And so say, for example, you had, we called it customer profile instead of customer view for the component that we reuse. There's a solution in Ruby that I'm going to share. So imagine for a second we're building out a chess game, and we've got a piece, a rook, and it's got a pretty simple interface here with a mix-in, slidable mix-in that gives it some functions. It's got a symbol and move directions. We can go ahead and capture that as a blueprint, store it, do the same thing, and we've also got spec. We've also got specs paths for rook. And so we've stored that blueprint, and we want to start building out the queen. So we've got tests for queen. Queen doesn't exist. We can go to the queen file, queen piece for a chess game, and generate, and uses the same. Let's try that again. It uses the same interface. There we go. It didn't include the modules for some reason. You never know what you're going to get with generative AI. But here we've got the same interface. Since we used a rook for the basis for generation, the rook blueprint, it already knew we had a method called horizontal dirs, and it kind of assumed and inferred that we have a method called diagonal dirs. And so let's go ahead and see if our queen spec passes. Something different would happen if I save the file. We get a failure. And the failure is that diagonal dirs doesn't exist. And so let's check out the slidable module. We can see that for whatever reason, we named it crisscross x dirs instead of diagonal dirs, even if the constant is called that. And one option is we can take the code we got back from the LLM and be like, you know what? Diagonal dirs is a better name for that. Let's change that. Let's change the bishop class. Let's change, everywhere else in our code base. There's another option because of how flexible Ruby is. And we've built this module called synonym. And what that does is we can actually hook into method missing, look at all of the methods that the class that had the method called on it has available. Yes, LLM is large language model. Sorry, I should have done that. Looks at all the methods that it has available, tells it what method was called, and asks the LLM, is there a method out there that's a synonym of this method? And we can go here, we can include and run the test again, and it passes. And so I have this code up on a gist, and I'll share a link later. But this is roughly kind of what's going on here. Making a call out to GPT-4. And so to take it another step further, this is really nice. I am embracing Postel's law in the code I make, but I need to rely on library writers and everybody else to do that as well. Ruby solves that problem as well, because everything is everything is modifiable, right? And so here, say for whatever reason you feel like calling day of week on a date object, even though wday is the method that you'd like to call. We can run this file, undefined method day of week. If we monkey patch in synonym to date, we can go ahead and uh, run this, and the code works. The next step is why would I want to it feels like it's a lot of work to have to open every single class that I'm going to be using individually. Ruby solves that problem as well. You can just you can just put your best practices away and monkey patch the meta class. And I had this as I was running through this. I shared a screenshot with Andrew as I was running through this that the Copilot auto completed that comment with "I'm going to monkey patch the world." Um, I don't know how practical something like this is, but I, as like Andrew mentioned, we've kind of started talking about like how LLMs are going to change uh, the way we program, and we were talking about how flexible Ruby is and how easy it is to you know, kind of explore, and just kind of pulled on this thread and took it as far as I could go and made it here. Even the example here for synonym, probably not super practical in production, but Ruby also makes it possible to add alias methods. And so if you are working in a test-driven development style way, you can have it run your you can have it run your entire test suite and throw in something like right. And look at your git diffs afterwards and see like where do we have method names that maybe don't make sense, that are the LLM thinks it should be something else. Maybe you leave it because how often do you really look at the code that how often do you look at the assembly that your compiler spits out? If all your tests are passing and all it took to get your tests to pass were a few alias method lines, is that big of a deal? I think it's probably a question worth asking, especially as we get into, as we start competing with the Devons that all of these companies are creating, the more and more things that we can kind of, you know, put aside, and best practices that we can put away that maybe aren't best practices anymore in this new paradigm. I think it's the question that's, at least for me, been pretty fun to ask. And so I saw a question here. Does it change if you change horizontal dirs to Y dirs? Let's try it. It's slidable. That's not how you use alias method. Uh, we're gonna get two method missing calls here, so it's gonna take a little bit. Huh. It looks like it blew up somehow. Sorry, didn't practice with that one, but I guess probably widers. Maybe it didn't catch it. I don't know. Code, I will have links at the end to play around with this if anybody else is curious. But I'll back to the presentation. Um, okay, there we go. Um, but so all of this is really talking about, like, with Ruby, we're able to Ruby enables the ability to be open to mostly right or directionally right code, which unlocks a whole bunch of new possibilities, like you just saw here, of interacting with the LLM in live running code to to generate something new that you don't have explicit. And so, in my mind, it almost kind of takes meta programming to the next level. Uh, I've got a handful of other experiments that I'm happy to share if anybody's curious. There's a lot of interesting context around if you know the HTTP method, you know the route, and you see the parameters, the controller action basically writes itself. And so I have code if anybody's curious about that. Basically, no controller actions besides one that routes everything to essentially a controller action missing method. But uh, all that said, mentioned Devin a couple times here. Uh, there's a lot going on. There are a lot of communities going on trying to figure this out. I mentioned blueprints, written a lot about. I see the role of software engineer kind of moving a step up the layer of abstraction, referenced kind of the assembly to compiled languages change. I see something like that kind of on the horizon, and there's a lot of activity going on. Here are three communities. One, the Promptable Architecture Discord that we've created. It's kind of a grab bag of all different types of languages. Kind of the big thing where a few of us are digging into right now are Smalltalk and Smalltalk variants, which is pretty mind-bending. Um, the Ruby AI Builders Discord. Oh, I didn't know there was an NYCRB Discord. I'll throw that on the next one. Um, Ruby AI Builders Discord is another one that the creator of Ruby OpenAI runs. Um, Andre is not here, but I met him on NYCRB at a past event. Creator of LangChain RB and LangChain RB Rails, which is something we actually use in blueprints. A lot of really interesting Ruby AI activity going on there. And yeah, I don't know. Come join us, share what you're building. As you can see, we're uh, you know really enjoy some of the absurdities that you can do with Ruby and kind of pushing the limits. So really excited to see uh, what you come up with or what you're thinking about. But with that, uh, any questions? Yeah, Andrew, sorry about that. I didn't know there was a NYCRB Discord. I'll have to get in there.
The
Yeah, no worries.
can you share how the blueprint you like can anyone go to the repo right now, pull down that code and exercise the blueprint server?
Yes.
And then that just runs in the background, and you basically the plugin connects to it and sends your code into the database, gets vectorized somehow.
Right. Yeah. Fully open source, blueprints.sublayer.com. There's a demo video there, new stuff kind of coming kind of every day. You can download the server. There are links to all the editor plugins. Um, and yeah, and look through the code. There's a lot of concepts, but like because of things like LangChain RB and others, there's not a lot of code. It's a lot of stitching a lot of these concepts together.
That's cool. I'm looking forward to checking it out.
Thanks. Yeah, we think it's, the way we're thinking about it is like it's very, very similar to the way I know, at least I approach working on a new story. A lot of times there is some code somewhere else in in our project or in the company that I'm going to go and look for, open up, and either copy and paste or repurpose. This kind of just automates all of that for you using some new techniques, some old techniques.
So are you are you scoping sort of like completely automated generation of code without that type of prompt level interaction, like much higher level prompts, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Or that's a TBD.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Are you thinking future wise that you would like bring the prompt level up, to much higher, like, just build an app that does such and such, as opposed to, just give me this piece this view that does an index.
I I could see things going that direction, but I still think it's probably piece by piece. I think the where we're taking it is a little bit more. I don't know. Have any of you ever kind of downloaded an app template or something? I'm blanking on the name of some of them where it's like fully featured and then you have to go in and look through the whole thing and cut out the code that you don't want. We're kind of like inverting that. And I I know I have trouble without like being really comfortable with a framework or like an app template and building a lot of them. Uh, it's easy to spend so much time. It like almost doesn't speed you up because you're spending so much time deleting stuff versus as you build it up piece by piece over time, having an understanding and having like a mental mapping of where these things roughly are. And especially if it's geared toward you doing that code that like maybe, I could see a world where, if you've built an example of like a Trello app or something, and it's the way that you would build it, yeah, being able to say like, follow all my blueprints for building a Trello app versus something you're not familiar with. I feel like that we'd still run into like the same problem we run into where it's like, where did they put this code? Why did they name this column that? What's this? What's that? Um, That being said, we are going to be like kind of releasing packages for blueprints pretty soon, where one of the problems we've kind of realized is that if you put out a new open source library and it's after the cutoff of any of the AI generators, the like learning cutoffs, it might as well not exist for code generation. But with blueprints, you can actually give it examples of here's how you would do this in this library, here's how you would do this in this library, and be able to generate from that by giving it examples. And so there's a little bit of I don't know, sliding scale to that answer, or that question.
Yeah, it makes sense. I love the approach. It makes AI development seem a lot more human friendly. But it's also very pragmatic and practical too, for all the reasons you stated. It's like really that part of it's really cool.
Thanks. Well, if there are other questions, I do have, actually, I guess I'll throw this
I was
too.
gonna ask, or I'm
Oh,
probably gonna say, it's so interesting. I can see a couple things going. Um, Probably like, or I just want to like preface. Remember, like, do you know why? Like linters are like one of the most popular things around, right? Like, code styling linters because everybody wants to write their own way. Oh, I want to use tabs, or I want to use spaces. I want this, that. I want double. I want, right? I want brackets here, not there. Like that's like an endless holy war of stuff. And linters are kind of there to just like, okay, I don't care how you write it. We're gonna run a linter. Everyone's code is gonna look the same, right? And the big benefit of that is, hey, everyone's gonna be looking at the same code, right? Because we have one way of doing it. It's like, oh, it's eatable, digestible, and this is a best practice. And I can see how at the beginning using Blueprint to like, hey, this is a repo, this is a long-lived code base that we've had. It's tested, it actually works, and we've had like all these discussions and the tough, had holy wars around it, and like we settled on this and it works and it's making us money. Add any new feature, you got to follow this blueprint. And so I can see it doing that. It's like, okay, that's great value. It's almost like linters, but like at a code architecture level, right? You add a new piece. You want to make chess like a totally different game. You want to make 3D chess. Oh, this is given what you know about chess, make me 3D chess and architect the code in a way that makes sense. It's like, oh, that's how it can blueprint. But when you threw in the sin on LLM, I'm like, wait, that's gonna rule that can like mess up everything because in class will look completely different compared to your root class. Every single piece will have its own, like you just, looked at that piece of code. And so I'm wondering, wait, you're using Blueprint at the high level to kind of be linting for code and architecture level, but then you're asking you throw this in on LLM. Now you're like every single line can be its own individual thing. And I'm really just thinking about now, what will happen? What will code look like at scale, when you have lots of programmers working on it, using all these tools over time? And so I'm just not sure if this is the impression I got from all of this. And I don't know, what your thoughts on that, around that?
I I think I guess I've been thinking about it in the terms of like I don't look at the assembly. And what we've kind of found working with LLMs through this past year and using the LLM generated code is that the bigger, more important thing in all of this is your architecture, is your abstractions. Are these abstractions good for the LLM to generate, and do they piece together well? Um, and you start to get a feel. It's very similar to a lot of the clean code stuff that we've been talking about for a long time, but without the I don't know what the right word is, like the moral,
Dogma.
yeah, the dogma piece of it, where like, for a lot of time, the feedback loop for a lot of it is, 6 months, you may never even find out if the code you wrote is any good because it never comes back to you. Whereas here with LLMs, the feedback loop's a lot shorter. It either generates it or it doesn't. And so like in the same way that like your code either compiles or it doesn't, and 100 or 999,999 times out of a million, it's your fault, not the compiler's fault. Maybe not that far, but like most of the time, the it's not the LLM's fault that it can't generate what you want it to generate. It's on the design. And kind of keeping that in mind is one of the things that I think will unlock uh, a lot of the possibilities. I actually read a post a while back where he made an example of the example he made is he has these two terms called boundary intelligence and internal intelligence. And internal intelligence is how good are you or this thing at a particular activity, and boundary and intelligence is where do you apply that interior intelligence, or what do you let in. The example he gave was like, if you're the best poker player in the world, but you are really bad at table selection and only play against like also other really good players, you're not going to make that much money. But if you're a mediocre poker player, but you are the best in the world at picking what table to sit down at, you're going to make a lot more money. And I see the like choosing and designing the right abstractions to apply to the model in that same vein of these things aren't perfect, but they don't have to be if you don't give them problems where they have to be perfect. And so, very long-winded way of saying the important part is the abstractions, the way you put them together, the testing, all of the infrastructure around it. Line by line, it doesn't matter. Like we're not going to be looking line by line that much anymore, except kind of to do those, you know, kind of, I know it was a big thing that people did for like hand optimizing assembly. Not I can't imagine. I can't remember the last time I even looked at assembly code, if ever. I know it was a thing. We'll probably be in that transition period for a while as we like hand optimized LLM generated code. But I think that'll fade away too as we move up the layers of abstraction.
So do you see like a point? Well, but we're still going to be writing code from us from all this context because Blueprint's based on code you wrote.
Right.
That code has to be correct though and testable. It's really interesting. So Synon LLM came
I'm
about.
trying to pronouncing it.
It
Sorry.
came about as a requirement or as an experiment.
Yeah, no, it was more of an experiment or a joke.
So
It was
it's not actually required in the way you currently would use Blueprint. Is that true?
it's not.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
No, we're more kind of playing around with a little bit of like how like on the side of how far can we go of just like letting the LLMs kind of loose in the code and you know that's where that came from, but it is fun to see it work.
It is neat. It's going to be really curious to see what like a CS degree is like in 5 years, another 5 years. What's being taught, maybe even 7 years. I don't know how long you have to go.
Just coming back to the tests, I always feel like I know when I'm doing TDD, like the one of the very first, I always take a shortcut to just make the test pass, right? In the simplest way possible. And I'm just wondering, so that's me intentionally doing it with the kind of like the side note, okay, it's probably gonna get more complicated later. Or when it does, I'll update it. I'm really wondering, just coming back to like hallucinations for an LLM. It's like, oh, I gotta make this test pass, and then return true, or something like that, right? Or it just creates it just, or maybe I guess sounds like in your case, it doesn't even matter then, right? You can just if it just makes this like there's always that case of like the fizz buzz, right, where it's just like long hard code. If it's 3 this, if it's 5 that, and like it just does it to infinity or something, doesn't even matter then, right? So we'll probably never have to look at that. Is that kind of like the thesis you're going with?
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I definitely been trying to think about like how tests are going to change because like, if we start getting to this world of like, this code is there's no code to really test, right? There's just some rough guidelines and rough goals of like what we're trying to accomplish. And that's kind of all it has to go off of. You can't necessarily say that like uh this method returns this or given these inputs, these outputs, if that's an intermediate step uh from something that it's generated. Or if it's live generated at runtime, at deploy time.
Monkey patches it.
Monkey patches it in. I actually had some other experiments that I didn't get a chance to do of dynamic module loading too, of just like it actually tried to call synonym or take it a step further and actually like oh, this person's trying to call this method based on a synonym. Let's give it this module and let it do that. Which Ruby also allows.
Yeah, okay, I see. Well, it's all yeah. Well, I guess we also have to keep remembering, this is all something I have to just keep remembering too. Is like LLM is a non-deterministic model, yet we're trying to do deterministic things with it, and that's probably where that's like a paradigm shift that has to happen, even in me, because now I think about like, yeah, I don't care about the code as long as at the higher level it kind of does what I want. But even then, it's almost like very loosey goosey too, isn't it? Like,
Yeah, I mean, you saw my slides were kind of an example. Like I knew mostly what I was going to talk about. they supported my talk, but it wasn't exactly like, if I would have sat down and built out slides exactly what I would have had on there.
Had you had you done that before? Like, I mean, I'm
I
sure you did a dry run, but like, have you been doing that a lot where you just like dynamically have slides generated?
it occurred to me as I was putting the presentation together. It was like, oh, I'm saying you should do this for code. Like, why not do this for slides? And sent Andrew a DM on Discord. I was like, hey, I'm gonna try this. It may be a complete disaster. Um, but yeah, it was kind of like there's actually a talk by Brett Victor called A Humane Representation of Thought that I would highly recommend. But one of the things he talks about is this concept of explorable explanations. And he has a cartoon slide where he's, two people on stage talking and conversing about a model live. I guess in this far future where you don't have the big Apple Vision on, but being able to kind of talk to each other and have a model that you interact with as you explore it, and got super excited because feels like there's some lag. It needs to speed up a little bit, but like a step toward that where you may even have a bot coming into a Zoom meeting that can actually just listen to what you're talking about and throw up those slides live, which could be very cool too, with links to Wikipedia, pictures to, any kind of proper nouns with somebody references, like Richard's doing here for the Brett Victor talk.
Do you think there's going to come a point where, like, I mean, all of the change is kind of inevitable, but I guess no one can actually say this is what's going to happen, right? But you know how they talk about super ASI, artificial super intelligence, having to be basically supervised by other AIs. Do you think that that's where we go, with code generation? Because like we just talked about how kind of the black box nature of how things may become. So and the non-deterministic nature. I mean, I guess just like humans, right? If you tell me to write some code and someone else to write some code, you'll come up with maybe similar outputs with very maybe different approaches, right? I'm sure AIs or something comparable to that. But just to reiterate the question, do you think there comes a point where artificial intelligence and code generation has to be supervised by other artificial intelligence? Is that going to be the solution?
Uh, that's a good question. I think, well, like one thing actually, I guess kind of about what Andrew said earlier around linters. I personally have been uh, I really like to celebrate the differences in, like you mentioned, the like if you build something, Andrew builds something, I build something, it's going to be slightly different. It's going to be in our individual style. There's reasons behind that. We're not just doing it because like for no reason. I do certain things because I've run into problems doing it one way. I know I'm going to miss or misspell or leave off some area. You and Andrew and everybody else here probably have different reasons for doing things in your own style, and I think that's great. I think AI are probably going to, because of the non-deterministic nature of it, they are going to be go off in different ways. I've spent a lot of time not just with ChatGPT, but lately with Claude, and it's definitely a weirder experience. It's much more praise. It gives me a lot more praise, which is nice. Uh, but actually, another blog post I read recently, the person was making the argument that we're moving out of the Star Trek era of technology and into the Hitchhiker's Guide era of technology, where things are just like slightly weird. And I I'm a little skeptical. I don't know, if we get to ASI, none of this matters anyway. But I'm kind of skeptical of it for that reason, in that like we're approaching a lot of people are approaching a lot of these uh, new pieces of technology that we have available as if we can rely on them 100%, or that we will get to a place where we can rely on them 100%. Uh, I don't I don't know. Maybe I think there's a good chance we don't get there, but they're still useful in the meantime. And where was I going? Uh, whether we have AI, I think if we have AIs managing other AIs, we'll still be there to interact with them and still need to be a part of the loop rather than you just like kind of set it and forget it and we all just kind of like party.
Or they'll be there to tell you what to say in front of the crowd.
Right. We'll
Like,
spend all this time building. It's just I'm just like reading off a teleprompter. Or it's it's more like thinking about Marvin from Hitchhiker's Guide. It's just like, there's a little bit to my slide starting it out. It's like brain the size of a planet, and you want me to bring you an apple or whatever. Which another crazy video today. If anybody saw the what was it? Figure one. I don't know.
I didn't see that.
No,
If you
here
want to
else.
post it.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
so this stuff is fascinating, and I mean, do you spend much time thinking like, you know, this is, speculating, and are you just focused on let's build, what we're building and just keep iterating that? Or, are you trying to sort of like guide the ship toward, hey, let's make sure we arrive at this point in time in the future where this is going to be happening with, specifically with this domain? Or is it just too hard to
Uh,
predict?
I think it's hard to predict. I think like I guess I haven't one of the things that I like, looking back at and I saw a Twitter thread about this responding to Devin that like this kind of has happened to software engineering multiple times in its history. You had COBOL, and that was, business people were going to write code, and we're not going to need software engineers anymore. And then, you know, and then you had Java, and it's like, oh, it's just all going to be, it's all going to be offshore. And then we needed more software engineers when something like, through the 2000s. And like, there's always this like pendulum swing, or there always has been this pendulum swing of here is the way to do it, and this is how we're going to do everything. And then people, the story, the way that I usually tell the story is that there's this pendulum swing in software engineering of the formalists and the informalists. And the formalists are always trying to put structure, trying to define everything, whereas the informalists are like much looser. And you can kind of think about this from, the small talk and that group is over here in the informalist side. There wasn't really a mathematical underpinning of object-oriented programming when they came up with it in Park. It's more like a kind of a fuzzy vibes kind of programming. And then you have the formalists that, you know, building out type theory and, having, much more formal structure around things. So you had Smalltalk going to C++ and Java, and that kind of formalizing even the object-oriented programming ideas. And through the 90s, Java becoming really big and becoming very like this is the way you do it. And then you had Ruby, JavaScript, Python kind of come out with more dynamic typing, dynamic languages, and that kind of flipping all of it on its head, those being the languages and the style for another like 10, 15 years, and expanding, trying out all these new ideas to eventually getting to this place where we are now, where formalizing a lot of the ideas from the last 15, 20 years, right? And so with the majority of the industry, I guess, on the formal side, uh, I am looking at it and coming at it from the standpoint of, you know, let's go back to those informal roots. I mentioned in the promptable architecture Discord, we're digging into a lot of Smalltalk and Smalltalk variants. There was an Alan Kay talk a couple weeks ago that was like amazing, talking about how when jobs and Jobs and Gates came to Park to see the GUI and see the stuff that they were doing, they only took like 10% of their ideas. And there's a bunch of other stuff that is now possible and going to be even more possible with LLMs. And I think where we're going is, hey, this is really interesting. Nobody's really digging around in this area. Don't really have a like, this is what you said in your question,
Destination,
destination.
yeah.
It's more of a like, there's a lot of untapped ideas over here in this area, and I don't know, we're finding a lot of fun stuff. So
Yeah.
fruitful.
Really cool, fascinating. I mean, it's just the whole evolution of what's happening. It's once you get past the, maybe a lot of people will lose their jobs perspective. It's really fascinating. But it's a lot of stuff that we do. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. This is the last thing I'll say, and please maybe get some other people in the conversation. But a lot of what we do in this world of writing code, it's just so repetitive, and like it's been done a gazillion times. And it's just, you could sort of envision, I guess, parlaying on some of the stuff you said, where it's a much more, interesting future where you can create things that people just can't even figure out now because they're wasting so much time, like with this mundane pedestrian, like keep reinventing the same wheel over and over.
I just saw the comment on Devin from DHH that you shared.
Yeah, it's hilarious, right? Uh, he said something else today. I haven't actually read it. I just saw it come up in email. But yeah, I think it feels like, if you're not on the side of doing like the kind of work where you're um, building AI type of solutions, you're just, the train is, you're not going to be on the train, whether it's being a consumer of a tool like Blueprint or creating a tool like Blueprint is what I mean to.
We also, the other thing I guess I forgot to mention, we've also released I'm gonna have a more official announcement for the end of the week, but I'll share it here. We've also open sourced the AI DSL framework that we use to build it, and kind of just released that yesterday on Ruby Gems. And so that's also available if anybody is curious about getting started with you know, some Ruby and
Sweet.
um,
Nice.
we got right now just implemented, just have this idea of generators where you can, it's basically a string to string function, but gonna expand to all the different inputs, outputs, eventually, actions, tasks, agents, but starting small and working our way up. But
This is
yeah,
also where this
I'm
is
sorry.
also where this is also where you ask everyone here to start it with the get it.
Yeah. Can we get stars? Like and subscribe. I was gonna say, join the Discord and share like our Discord, any of the Ruby Discords. Um, and share what you're building. One of the things, so I stole that line of put your best practices away from Why the Lucky Stiff. I think there's a big opportunity and it's to kind of like take some advice from him and do some weird stuff, experiment, explore, and Ruby is the perfect language to do that in this with these new tools.
Yes.